what are the basic concerns of philosophy, and especially the basic problems in Western philosophy. All of us, certainly those who are coming from Western countries, you have been raised with a background of the Western philosophy, whether you know it or not. Whether you ever took a course in philosophy doesn't matter. All of Western thinking is coming out of ancient Greece originally. There's a recent British philosopher, Ian Whitehead, who said the whole of Western philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. Plato is a very famous ancient Greek philosopher. So all of our thinking, all of our values, it's coming out of that. And so we've all been trained in that. And if you're coming from India, nonetheless, the Indian school part, we have to overcome this subtle ideology again. This, subtle controlling assumptions of Western thought. So I just want to speak on that very briefly. So when we say principles of philosophy, we're talking about basically two things. In Sanskrit language, praman and tattva. So praman means valid evidence. So if I want to understand something, there must be evidence by which I can understand it, some kind of proof. So this is one thing. What is the valid evidence for making an argument or making any kind of philosophical statement? And then again, what are the basic tattvas, the basic truths that a philosophy is defending? So these are two things, praman and tattva. Now, I want to read to you about the origin of Western philosophy and then explain praman and tattva. So, historians tell us that philosophy, that means Western philosophy, was born in ancient Greece when thinkers became doubtful about a scripture called the Theogony, which in ancient Greece was one of the main religious texts. Theogony means the genealogy of the gods, or the origin of the gods. The Greeks, they worshipped many different kinds of gods. So, this Theogony says that everything, including the gods, came from chaos. Chaos is a Greek word, and it has come into English language and many other European languages. Normally we take chaos to mean something like pandemonium, a total confusion. You see, if we all start talking at once and running around, that's called a chaos. But that's not exactly what chaos originally meant. Chaos originally meant something like a void, a gap, you see? Something mysterious, something unknown. So everything, the world, all the gods, they were said in this scripture, Theogony, to come out of the unknown. That was the origin of everything. So, for those in ancient Greece with philosophical minds, they thought, wait a minute, this is not a sufficient explanation to say everything comes out of the unknown. So they began to speculate. They began to search for some principle that could explain the origin of everything. And so there are different philosophies. Some said everything comes out of fire or out of water. And Plato, who's the most significant ancient Greek philosopher, he said the origin of everything is mind. He proposed that there is something like a supermind. You see, a kind of transcendental mindscape. And within this mindscape, there are the ideal forms, the ideal thoughts. You know, just like a flower. Here's a simple example. A garden here with so many flowers. So these flowers are just reflections or shadows of some original ideal flower that exists in the universal mind. Now, the thing is, this, you may think, wow, this sounds something like Vaishnava philosophy, because we say that there's a spiritual world and there's the original boy and girl and the original cow and the original tree and all of that, and it's all reflected here. But no, the thing is that Plato only went as far as the mind, the mental plane, you see. So now we're talking here about three pramans, three sources of knowledge, or three evidences. There's what we see. We see this world, this material world. So the Greeks saw this material world, and then they asked, where does it come from? And so there's an answer given in another praman. That this praman, to see, is called pratyaksha. So then you see, but you don't see where it comes from. So you naturally ask, where did it come from? So they had a kind of shabda. Shabda, as you know, means a sound, authoritative testimony, a scripture. But that scripture was not very developed. The scripture more or less said, everything comes out of the unknown. So that doesn't really answer the question. Just give the unknown some name, chaos. It doesn't really answer the question. So therefore, the Greek philosophers began to speculate. That's the third praman, anuman, speculation. So there's pratyaksha, perception, there's anuman, to think, to speculate, and then there's shabda, authoritative testimony, like a scripture. So as you may know, these are the three pramans also in the Vedas, in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And we see these three pramans at work in all philosophies, in Greek philosophy. But the problem is that the order gets mixed around. You see, in our philosophy, actually Prabhupada said in Mexico City, and he was speaking with some philosophers, he said really, in our philosophy there's only one praman, and that's the Shabda, that's the Vedic scripture. And the other two, the perception and the speculation, that may serve this main praman. You can use, just like we say Shastra Shakshush. Shakshush means to see through the eyes, but one should see through the eyes of scripture. So in this way, Pratyaksha should become the servant of Shabda. And Anuman also. Prabhupada spoke of philosophical speculation. Yes, you can speculate, but you should not speculate in a way that violates the conclusions of Scripture. So this is so in our philosophy, the Shabda is the most important praman or evidence. If you just have some speculation, if you just have some perception, but you cannot correlate it to Scripture, then it is to be rejected. Then it is not important. You see, Scripture says this, someone may say, but I think, but that doesn't matter. See, Srila Prabhupada said, in Vedic circles, what we think alone doesn't count. Your opinion, in Vedic circles, nobody cares for. Or, what to speak of the sense perception. You see, the sense perception, Prabhupada says, according to sense perception, the sun is only as big as a coin in the sky. So if we want to say, I believe the sun is a very small coin-like disk in the sky, that won't even be accepted among scientists, what to speak among the followers of the Vedas. So, but we see in this Greek philosophy, what happened is that Plato, he had Pratyaksha, he had Shabda, and he had Anuman, but he took Anuman to be the most important, because the Shabda was deficient. There was not enough explanation. And so, Anuman became most important. And his Anuman is ultimately impersonal. You see? He had this idea of this ideal world of ideal forms. But ultimately, he said, when you get there, when you raise your consciousness to that platform, everything, he used this term asomatos in Greek. It means it is disembodied. Asomatos, soma, in Greek actually means the body. So asomatos means disembodied. There's no forms there. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to perceive with the senses. There's only thought. You see, so it's just floating in a realm of thought. That's the ultimate truth in Platonic philosophy. And all of Western philosophy descends from that. Therefore the whole Western philosophy, manorata, it is just riding on the mental plane. And it can come to no conclusion. And there's I'll tell you of a famous painting, painted by some Italian master. It shows Plato and his disciple, Aristotle. Plato, in this picture, he's pointing upward, like this. They're walking out of the academy, the school. And Plato's pointing up, and Aristotle's pointing down. That means they're having an argument. Now Aristotle is the disciple of Plato. Plato is saying the truth is up there in the world of ideas. And Aristotle is saying, but what about this world? You see? What about this world? And yet that is the other great strain of Greek philosophy, Aristotelianism, which is very materialistic. The followers of Aristotle, they said, hey, Plato, it's too far away, it's just all ideas. But there's this world we have to, this is actually the origin of science. Science starts with Aristotle. We have to study this world. Never mind these ideas. First you have to see what's here with your senses and understand it that way. So immediately in the very beginning, because the basis of Western philosophy is the mental plane, and the mental plane is the locus of duality, so immediately there was disagreement and division, and that's been going on ever since, and therefore you have so many schools, so many philosophers, so many arguments, never ending, and it never will end. It will just go on like that. So in our Vedic philosophy, we say there are 3 pramans also, but the absolute praman, the imperative praman, the praman you cannot challenge, is Shabda. And this Shabda, this Vedic sound, reveals 5 truths. And these are the 5 truths that Srila Prabhupada presents in his introduction of Bhagavad Gita, that there is Ishvara, there is a supreme controller. Everything hasn't just come out of nothing or accident or chaos or whatever, but there is a supreme origin and controller. And the second one is Jiva, we are all spirit soul, we are not this body. And the third one is Prakriti, there is a material nature which is the energy of Ishvara, and which is controlling the jivas in this material world. And there is Kala, there is time, the energy of time, the force of time, which is driving all events onward. And finally there is Karma. So in this book, if I may advertise it, because now it is 12 o'clock and time to stop. So in this book, Substance and Shadow, we are basically dealing with these 3 pramans and these 5 tattvas, and explaining them and showing how the materialistic philosophers, Western philosophers, have tried to deal with these same concepts in their own imperfect way, and try to show that the Vedic explanation is the only truly logical explanation by which we can understand why we are here, what is the purpose of life, what is the goal of life.